Welcome back to another edition of What's Your Story? They've been rich so far, and today is going to be another wonderful conversation. We are very blessed to get a guest from outside our union to come and talk with us. He's kind of outside of our union, yet he's kind of inside of our union as well. It's a unique situation that goes back years and years. But Pastor Victor Wilson pastors a church in Minneapolis, but his church is part of the Lake Union. Even though that's part of our territory, there was a time that it wasn't part of our territory, and that's when the church was planted. And as all of us know, Minneapolis was ground zero, if you will, of what began a lawfully difficult and long summer for us as a country, and we're still trying to find our way forward. He was just a few blocks away from where George Floyd lost his life at the hands of those police officers. And so he has been on the ground working with the communities there. When our church, I say church, is all banded together for a response, Pastor Victor Wilson was at the forefront of that leadership. And the way that they've served that community and blessed that community has been inspiring to watch. And so we invited him to come and to share his story with us. So again, that we could grow and learn, and as Seventh-day Adventist Church community, know even better how to keep our arms around each other as we work together on this great cause that God has given us. So, Pastor Wilson, welcome. And by the way, call me Gary. But welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And as you invited me to call you Gary, please call me Victor.
All right, thanks, Victor. Why don't we just start out? Where were you born and raised, Victor?
Chattanooga, Tennessee, 1979. I was born down there. We were part of South Central in the down there in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Was there until about almost 16, and then our family moved to my dad's country of Bermuda, a little island country of Bermuda, for the last 3 years of high school. So I was part of the Atlantic Union, and so it was a good experience being there. I think half the island was related to me, so that was an interesting experience. And so yeah, between Tennessee and Bermuda, that's where I grew up.
Did you end up going to Oakwood for college, or did you go to Atlantic Union, or where did you go to college?
We visited Atlantic Union, and then we visited Oakwood, and I'd done one of the Adventist colleges abroad. I'd gone to France for a summer, and I really wanted to go back for a year. I knew that if I did, I probably would be fluent. But on the college days trip we took, I felt impressed to go to Oakwood. My parents had gone, so I was trying to do a different route, but I think a week of prayer or something was happening, and I just felt this impression that that's where I needed to go.
Oakwood's a wonderful school. Yeah, well, I lived in Chattanooga when you were born. Okay. We didn't cross paths, though. That's too bad. What did you learn from your parents and grandparents' family? What did you learn about the racial issues that are prevalent in the United States?
It's interesting, and I see my kids kind of in a similar spot now, but my parents had gone to Oakwood during the early 70s, and although my dad was from Bermuda, going to school in Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama, was one where he experienced racism. My mom grew up, she's from Oklahoma, so I have Native American in the background. She actually traced to Cherokee, and so there's some of that. But they both talked to me and my siblings about how to how to talk when we're outside the house, what to do when a police person approaches you, how not to seem suspicious to people. Um, but sometimes it just seemed like it was so much information and so much scarring that, oftentimes I think, well, we're Christians and you guys are talking so much about blackness. What about everybody else? And at times it just seemed like a lot. And so my kids are what they're experiencing and what they're experiencing from their dad being involved and their mom as a teacher, staying up on current events. Um, it can be a lot. So I guess kind of in short, we were taught how to come back home, how to survive. It's a conversation that many, if most, if not all, those who find themselves of the darker hue have a conversation with their kids about um, how to come back home if you encounter the police, um, how to conduct yourself at night, how to dress so that you don't seem, you don't fit the stereotype. Um, you know, so there are things like that that were taught to us. Um, Sometimes we felt it was excessive, but those are the kind of instructions that we got.
Well, this is something I've learned through these conversations. Is a lot of people call it the talk, um, of what happens or what should you do if you encounter a policeman or being stopped or whatever. Um, in my world growing up, the only conversation my dad had with me about that was if you get a ticket, you're going to pay for it yourself. But the concept of fearing for anything, your life or any other kind of mistreatment, wasn't ever part of the dialogue, and yet this is so consistent. Have you ever been stopped by a policeman?
Yeah, yeah, I've been stopped by policemen, and thankfully, they have been. Um, don't think I've had any adverse encounters. Um, but the fear has always been there, and it's actually ratcheted over the last 5 to 6 years, being stopped. Um, but thankfully, I don't know if it's the goodness of God or the way I've been dressed or what my parents taught me kicking in. So I'm not sure um, if it's all of the above that has kept them from being truly negative. Um, but they have, it's always um, a big concern when I am stopped, but I've been stopped.
Yeah, I'm sure the just the fear and the anxiety when you see those lights come on. Who am I going to encounter?
And I think everybody to some degree, especially if you've been speeding, has a little concern. But but yeah, the real anxiety, the real fear, especially 2016, um, when we had shootings around then as well. 2015, 2016, Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, um, and I was at the forefront of the community. This time around, I've probably been in more of the forefront of our Adventist community, but in 2016 it was more of the community front. And I did have, you know, we were intending to do something at a mall, and I remember somebody coming to the house and serving me a desist a desist letter, actually putting in my hand, and that was kind of a startling experience. Somebody coming to my house, um, but it wasn't a police. I think it was a courier service. But just being involved, deciding to um, be a visible part, because as a person of color, you're always a part of the struggle, um, whether it's intentional or not. So it's yeah. So, but that anxiety is layered for a person of color, African Americans in particular.
One of the phrases I hear a lot is I talk to people about the racial issues that we face. A lot of times, and I think good meaning people, but they'll say, "Well, I'm colorblind. I don't see color." As an African American, what do you think of when you hear that phrase?
I don't know if you're a if you're a Star Trek fan or seen Star Trek, but um, their perennial enemy, or probably one of the first ones introduced in the Next Generation, was the Borg, and the Borg assimilates. So there's not really any true diversity. There are people from all over the galaxy, or the quadrants that have been assimilated, but they act as one mind. And so when people say colorblind, it's kind of akin to that, where it's um, I don't see I don't see race in that, as long as you are operating with what I deem is the best thing, or what I see as the model, then it doesn't matter what color you are. But as soon as there is something that is different, that can't be right. And so that whole "I don't see color" um, is can be challenging at times to hear that, because it almost says that your your experience is not valuable unless it fits this container. Um, or it's not appreciated unless it fits this thing, or it's irrelevant. So those are some of the connotations that come off. Um, and there are people who have said those statements, and they're genuine people. Um, and so you try to excuse it, but there are times where it really rubs against you, where it's that as long as you're assimilated into the culture, um, your color doesn't matter.
Good answer. That was a good example. I never thought about it that way. Appreciate that. So, Victor, how has racism affected your life?
Everything really. It affects the tone of your voice when the sun sets. So if I'm walking, it's a little dark, and I come across Caucasian lady or someone, I raise my voice an octave um, to appear less intimidating or threatening. Um, Colorism comes into play, where I've experienced different treatment from those who are darker than me, um, where there's a little something different in the experience. I remember being at Andrews, and I first I was chalking up because I was wearing a wedding band at the time. I still do when I go on different trips or things away from home. But at first I was thinking, well, maybe I'm treated different because of this responsibility, and being married and different things. But it was more than one person saying it. Where there was some different feelings going on. So racism, the intent of racism and its construction in America runs really deep in that not only were um, poor whites and freed slaves this introduced to really keep them apart from working together. Colorism was also a part of that, that if the lighter you are, the closer to the master's house you were. Oftentimes, the less difficult work you had to do. And so some of that kind of carries in the culture where um, when it comes to dating, sometimes it comes to these things, you're thinking lighter is better, or this or that, or where you're trying to go and get. And even even the names you give to your children, if you're part of the college culture, or you grew up Adventist and you want your kids to get certain jobs, you're going to try to name them more neutral names that when people see their resumes, they don't have to do a double take or discount them because their name sounds ethnic. So it kind of influences, naming your kids. It influences how you interact with your own community. In fact, people color will, being honest, they'll say that they are conditioned against their own people because you come across a crowd of individuals who are Black, you start being afraid because of what has trickled down. Just a couple of months ago, Pastor Darnisha Thomas and myself, we were walking. Actually, not Pastor Thomas. It was another pastor, community pastor, D. McIntosh. We were walking back from an event, and there was a crowd of people, and she was about to walk through. She says, "Okay, if we can walk through." They said, "What are you talking about? You're a queen. Yeah, y'all go through." And my initial reaction was one of fear, but my secondary reaction is like, these are my people. And so it's interesting that no matter what the situation is, there's been a conditioning that has been a part of the culture for over 400 years that affects just the way I instinctively see the world. Biblically, being educated, the Spirit at work, there's a second eye that comes to seeing situations, but the initial reaction has been one in which our country and our culture has conditioned us to fear ourselves and for others to fear us. And so it's really been something that has been challenging to find yourself in this racial system. And then what has been very disheartening is to see it globally. So it's not just an African American experience. It is a people who are dark are experiencing this in every continent. And so it's one that impacts the psychological and emotional and physical well-being. And so it's like life is hard for everybody, but when you layer on, so for instance, when the pandemic hit, that hit everybody. It's like you got to change your way of life. That was a stressful, anxiety-inducing experience that has gone on and on. So when the incident happened with George Floyd, it was like, oh, really? So it's like, not only are you dealing with what everyone is dealing with, and jobs and just day-to-day struggles, now it's compounded with the reminder that we're not all in this together. With the reminder that things are so different for you, even though everybody's experiencing this common enemy, there's still another enemy in our midst. And so it really has a toll, a psychological, emotional, and even spiritual and physical toll, um, that I personally feel.
Very, very thoughtful answer. Thank you. You brought up some things I wouldn't have thought of. I appreciate that. Victor, when you've gone to different places in your journey, whether it be a city or a mall or a meeting or a church even, and you're the only person of color in there, how did that make you feel? What was that like for you?
Um, it happens quite a bit, depending on what circles of influence you end up moving in. Um, you switch gears. You've probably heard something similar from others you've interviewed, but really, um, you put on your professional or corporate personality at times. You will The tone of your voice changes. You have to change to blend in. I think there was a comedic sketch that I saw either on Twitter or on TikTok or something like that, where there was a black woman, and the people were commenting. She was the only one commenting on, isn't it great that I've started a business where everybody can be themselves? And she was like, yeah, this is great. And then her inner thoughts were like, you're not being yourself. All these things are are layered in here, and um, so you're more conscious when you're the only one in the room. You're more conscious of not being what people deem as stereotypical. Um, you don't want, you're less inclined to ask questions when you need to. Sometimes you are um, more guarded than you normally would be, just so that you don't um, reflect bad on your race or culture. And that's probably the biggest thing is now you represent the race. So the interaction that people have with you is one that they walk away with. Black people are like this, or black people are not like this. And so oftentimes, and sometimes not even conscious, it's that um, it's kind of been built in where you now carry this weight, and that that oftentimes is the experience, and you have to be intentional sometimes of not doing that, of being even more authentic, so that people can see the real you, but also know that black people are persons. And I think one of the things that impacts this a lot is that in the European culture, compartmentalization is something that is very crucial, where somebody can be fired, but they say, it's just business, it's not personal, kind of thing. And it really be meant that way or taken that way in general. It still hurts, it's still painful, but there can be that sense. Um, but it's a different thing for me, where it's a you can't really separate the two. And so um, when it comes to racism or being the only person in a room, sometimes it seems easy for white individuals to have people who they call friends who are black, but still look disparaging on the culture, the black culture. And so all that is kind of subliminal or subconscious when you're the only black person in the room.
Interesting. Um, How has God helped you deal with this? You use a different word. I'll use the word systematic racism that we have here, or how is He still working with you on that?
In multiple ways. Yeah, multiple ways, and like he's still working with me on a few things. There are times where rage builds up, and I really have to go to the Lord in prayer. But um, looking at the Bible in a non Eurocentric way or Americanized way is helpful. So, for instance, it's the Adventist Church, Baptist, Pentecostal, Lutheran, Catholic. Most denominations have this Europeanized version of Jesus. But when you study history, study culture, you even look at Revelation, you see that Jesus was a person of color. Scientifically, we're looking at these things, and what's helpful about seeing Jesus as a person of color doesn't mean he's black, but it also implies that he's not this long-haired, blue-eyed version that people have been given, um, but really looking at the history and things is like Jesus was he experienced what it's like to be poor. He experienced what it's like to be mistreated. He experienced what it's like to um, not have, the best given to you, supplied to you. He knows what it's like to be in that struggle. And then, looking at his submission to the Father and giving himself on the cross has been a major way in helping to sustain me as a man, sustain me as a believer, sustain me as an Adventist. Um, because one of the podcasts I like listening to is the Adventist History podcast, and Guy is comical, but he's also pretty frank. And um, I think he did maybe a 5 or 6 part thing where he talks about the racial failings of our church and how and how even with some of those things how God endeavored to work. And so looking at our history as a church, not just even American culture, just our Adventist culture, um, it can be very disheartening. But looking at the life of Jesus, and then also this experience with George Floyd has been interesting in that um, the lack of presence and involvement that myself and the community group I worked with in 2015 and 16, there was a different outcome in 2020 where there were more white individuals and non-African American individuals that were taking an active part, and so that kind of helped provide some hope. Um, but it's challenging, and so one of the things that this time around is God has given me the opportunity to speak to our Adventist church in different ways on different platforms. I know for a while, about a month and a half, 2 months, I think I was on some type of panel or interview about every week. And so I saw that as part of the work that God had given me to do. And the response that has come, like there's even a ministers group on Facebook, and the response has been encouraging in that people want to know how to help and how to be a part, and this time around is different too, which is help in dealing with it is not trying to impose what they think, but really asking, um, kind of asking what is it that we can do to be an ally or be a part. So, no, that's a long-winded answer. Probably all these answers going to be kind of long-winded, but that's something that has really help me deal with it, and to and be staying connected with the church family has helped too. Like some of my seniors in prayer meeting have last couple of prayer meetings been um, praying for one of our country's officials and just asking God to give us the kind of heart we need to pray for, to forgive, to really represent what Christ did for all of us.
That was a wonderful answer. Don't feel you're long-winded at all. That was very thoughtful. I never thought of the context of Jesus living in a time where he dealt with racism every day, being part of where he was under Roman rule, and so his experience, you can relate to that if you go back and read the Bible as it is, and through those lenses. That's good. Thank you. I never thought of that. What do you think are the biggest barriers we have, Victor, of minorities and Caucasians working together? What are the biggest barriers that we can work on?
I think they're changing a little bit on certain levels, but I think some of the biggest barriers, and I kind of alluded to in the other answer, is that um, our Caucasian brothers and sisters feeling as if um, they have the answer and the solution, and that they're bringing salvation to the rest of the world, or to the Black culture. Um, I remember, and this really hit hard for a lot of my congregation members a couple of years ago, and I remember our GC president um, making some statements that, and even recently with what's happened, and each time he's tried to correct them, but the way things are done are challenging. So, for instance, just blanket statement, kind of one of the challenges is making those blanket statements as if um, anything from Africa is of the devil, anything of African origin. For instance, drums in church. I know there's certain churches, and uh, um, one of our dearly beloved schools, had this policy: you couldn't have a drum visible; it could be behind somewhere on the soundtrack. I know quite a few churches do that, but drums are evil. But we have big and elaborate organs, plastered everywhere. When those were also considered the devil's instrument at one time, and just viewing certain things that are sometimes simply cultural as evil because it's uncomfortable, or when there is, I'll give you an example. So, in terms of having that solution for everyone. So, my church is about a mile west of the Twin Stadium, and just kind of correcting an earlier fact, we're about 5 miles northwest of where George Floyd died. was killed. We have a sister Adventist church that's in the Mid-America Union that's a few blocks away. But we're about a mile south of some of the fires and things that broke out. But we had white pastor from the suburb just felt that God had given him a vision for the inner cities. I said all that to say that we're near the north side. We're considered a part of the north side neighborhood where a lot of challenges happen. And we got letters that, they wanted us to participate in this day. And so they had, Bibles, and they were going to basically blitz the inner city. And myself and some non-Adventist ministers, we were talking to each other. We were like, what kind of foolishness is this? You didn't talk to us. You didn't have a conversation with us saying, what are the challenges? How can we help? No, you and the Lord had a vision, and you decided to set this whole thing up and then want us to be a part. And there were a couple of members who participated, and a couple of others, and just said it felt like a photo op experience. And so I think that is kind of a big challenge to where you feel the need, but the approach is not a good approach. And a few years ago, our community elders, there are some initiatives they want to do, and the government was giving out some grants. And so there are organizations that were not people of color that didn't see what's actually happening or what's being worked on in the community, got those grants and were able to do different things, whereas those who needed it didn't get as much or get all they needed to get. And so that has been and sometimes continues to be a big challenge of saying, all right, there's a problem, we're going to fix it, as opposed to there's a problem, Lord, how do we go about being a help, and then communicating with those in that environment. We want to help, but we don't want to be in the way. We want to support you, but how do we do it? And so, like in some of the protesting, there's been that education where you have white allies who ask that, who've learned to ask that, how can we be a help? What do you need us to do? And so when that approach is taken, that's a big barrier that is removed. And then the other part that relates to the fears of working together as well as the barrier is that there have been so many accounts in history where people of color have trusted their white allies or supposed allies and have been burned many times. Even going back to the government, quote unquote, giving immunizations to poor community, free immunizations, but in actuality, they were experimenting on birth control on women of color, harming them. So it's like things like that with our own church. Pastors of color had a different, a lower retirement rate than white counterparts. So it's like you're giving yourself to service, and then there's a different reward, even though you've been giving the same or more. And so I think some of those historical challenges have really made it difficult, and then the expectation is that we forgive, and so if you compare to domestic abuse, people of color have often been the person who's abused. But what often happens in those stories is that the abused is the one who gets accused, gets say, well, you should forgive, you should do this, you should do that. And the perpetrator oftentimes, and I know that's kind of harsh language, but that's something that we've experienced as a people where we have been abused and mistreated, but we're expected to change. We're expected to do things differently. Um, and then the last thing I'll probably say, kind of related to conference, there's often talk about abolishing these state and regional conferences. Um, and with that talk is just abandon the regional conference and you all come join the state, um, as opposed to the other way around. And it's oftentimes it feels like there's so much we have to do in order for there to be peace, as opposed to our white counterparts humbling themselves. And so that's kind of those barriers as well as fears that people of color have in genuinely working out on a corporate level or a holistic level. We do well pretty much, or do better, I should say, with one-on-one stuff. But when it comes to the system or it comes to the setting up of things, it has to be a move of the Holy Spirit on both white and Black and other cultures to experience a healthy collaboration that looks like one of harmony and not one of monotonism, if that's even a word. But you get what I'm trying to say.
That's good. That's good. You thought you were using harsh language, but I think it was pretty descriptive and pretty accurate. There's a difference between, I think, forgiving someone and trusting. A spouse has cheated on another spouse. Well, you can forgive that spouse for cheating on them. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily trust them now, because the trust has been broken. And I sense that that's where we're at on many issues, is that there's a trust thing that it's going to take some time. And I can understand that, and I don't think that's unfair. You said something earlier, though, that made my heart feel good. I want to go back and see if I heard it well. You said in times in the past when you've worked with communities in response to an incident where real racial bias was shown, it was different this time around with George Floyd. You saw more people there, more white people there, if you will, Caucasians, joining in and being part of. Then the question I'm leading into is, do you have hope that the hearts can change? That this is something that we can, as a community, and especially a Christian community, do better?
Yeah, that's a good question. The simple answer is yes, but the more complex answer is almost I don't know. That may sound bad, but it's and maybe it's to the degree that God changes hearts. Looking at the biblical example, it's possible to take someone like Peter, someone like Cornelius, putting them together, to see Peter go from that to eating with Gentiles, but he still has his struggles, because we find that Paul has to rebuke him at some point. But it's possible when we fully surrender to the Spirit of God. So I do have hope, but it's met with a lot of discouragement at times where you really wonder, can it really change? Can the gospel really have that power? And you see experiences where the gospel does have power, but you wonder sometimes if the gospel can really impact in a now institutionalized denomination. I know we like to view Adventism as a movement or say it is, but it's been far from a movement. There are movements happening within the church now, but as a whole, we are an institutionalized organization. And with that institution, there comes defending and protecting. Some of the actions in the last few year-end meetings have been disheartening. The way things were done with women's ordination were disheartening. So it's like, you know, sometimes I have much less hope for transformation in our denominational leadership structures, but I tend to have more hope on local level interactions. And so I do believe that nothing is impossible with God. But it's like that hope admittedly wavers, on whether there can be this true dramatic change. And really this question is a good one in changing hearts because it, on the broader racial issue in our country, it's like there's always this debate on whether affirmative action should be tossed out or whether it's here. But what you saw in Charlottesville and other places kind of says, yeah, that has to stay because thankfully there's been a good portion of people whose hearts have been changed, but there's a good portion of people who respect rules and are just trying to work with the rules. If they find loopholes, that's better for them. But it's when those restrictions aren't put in place, and I know Adventist Church is kind of divided sometimes on minorities. Our African Americans tend to vote Democrat, and our white counterparts tend to vote Republican. Even though the reality is that many of us Black Adventists identify with a lot of the moral standings of Republicans, but the way they treat those who are living is one that has had many African American Adventists voting Democrat or independent, and so it's like you see there are these increments of people's hearts being changed, but then you also see those who are just trying to follow the rules but have not really engaged a person of color to know their story like you're doing now. And I have to say, I appreciate you making this effort to try to understand the suffering. Because if you're handicapped or you're caring for someone who's handicapped, you rarely think about the plight of those who are handicapped, that they might need a ramp or need a larger bathroom. And so there's hope, but it's fighting against a lot of discouragement. That's probably the honest answer there.
Yeah, appreciate it. You've touched on it a little bit already, but is there anything else you'd like to tell us about maybe what our church could do more or less to promote healing and reconciliation?
There are a lot of big things and a lot of practical things. For instance, when it comes to and I know there's been efforts with the Steps of Christ book that have been pretty powerful having the different versions of Jesus. Um, but like our Bible study material, like I remember being at a camp meeting, and no, I won't pull out the book, but my wife ended up getting it. But I remember talking to the person. I say, "How did you guys do this whole thing?" And there's not a diversity of people in these Bible books. Everybody looks European, and scientifically, when you look at things, you have this picture of Jesus that is not authentic, and you have these movies. The disciples are becoming more authentic, but Jesus still has a perm, So um, it's just simple things like that that our church carries on that I wish it would stop doing. I remember there was this program that's a good program. In fact, the person I worked with in college on the radio was a part of it. And I remember there being, and I think it got deleted, but there was a version of Jesus that had curly hair, kind of an afro look, and it was about the second coming, him coming back. But that was quickly replaced with the more traditional looking Jesus. And this was our Adventist produced stuff. And I was like, man, um, that like, so it's things like that where it's like, um, let's, if we're going to show Jesus, if we're going to have Bible study, let's be true to the Great Commission, every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Is the gospel only for people of color, and only white individuals? And does heaven mean that I won't be black anymore? Now I'll be white. Is that what we're trying to grow to? Is that what we're trying to aspire to? So I think the images is one. I think another one is really understanding music. One of the classes I appreciated in seminary was taught by um, Dr. Dukan. The her name is forgetting my mind, but we have Jacques Dukan, but it was his wife, Dr. Dukan, who would do the music uh, seminar, symposium, or weekend. And so I appreciated her class because she spoke to the misinformation that everything from Africa is evil, and she highlighted different cultures and the sacredness. Being able to appreciate the differences um, within America. Like our church will appreciate the Messiah who will come to our general conference, but will not appreciate um, African American Adventists playing drums, singing about Jesus' second coming, but in a different style. It needs to fit these tight parameters. And so I think really making an effort um, in our official materials and our Bible study materials and our thing to really let go of unfounded tradition that has been a part of institutionalized racism. And then I would say probably one of the bigger things or more institutionalized things is when we have things like general conference, is to not try to rush things through voting, but to allow for translation, allow for thoroughness to be done, as opposed to trying to hold on to a certain ring of power. Just I feel like the further we get away from allowing the Holy Spirit to truly lead us, we invite the Holy Spirit in. We do oftentimes what missionaries used to do. We not just bring the gospel, we bring this culture with us, and we call it civilization. Um, while not realizing at times we are bringing a a mutated form, and not allowing this gospel to be incarnational. And I think the further we move away from truly letting the Holy Spirit have his rightful role, then we begin mandating certain rules that are out of touch with um, with the real world. Sometimes the further we get up in the organization, it becomes an echo chamber, um, kind of like how these algorithms are built, where um, if you like something, the algorithms will find out what else you like or what else you will think, and so I won't get the other view. I won't get the other side. I'll just get what feels comfortable to me. And so I think as a church body, as you know, a large part of our leadership are Caucasian. Um, I think if more work were done, and it can begin with work like you're doing now to really not just hear the story, but to see how are we lining up with the gospel and how are we failing, and how do we make our call and election sure. Um, you know, we as we talk about the last days, we talk about persecution, but for people of color, a lot of us have been experiencing a time of trouble for a long time. And so um, to really step back and ask God to give a clear view and allow that to impact how we lead, how we teach, how we train. Um, so I think really stepping back and allowing the Holy Spirit, one, to really work, and then begin to not just dialogue, but being able to pause the factory of Adventism long enough to see why people are losing fingers or going out in body bags. Why are people leaving the church? Why are things declining? Or why is there a uprising in Adventist social justice? What are these things? Is it rebellion, or is it people saying um, that we can't continue to have this? We can't be called the people of God, but we're ignoring people in need. And so I really think just stopping that machinery and being able to really assess, where are we? Am I hearing my brother and sister? Am I doing something about it? And in the book of Acts, we do have that model of where, you know, the Grecian widows who were still Jews weren't being treated the same. So prayer, they do something structurally about it. Um, so I think that combination of spirit, the Holy Spirit, and restructuring. Talk about revival, but we need revival and reformation, restructuring to take place. So I think that is a big ask and a big thing that I think our church has to do in order to remain the remnant people.
You that was you gave us a lot of food for thought there. I thank you for that. Um, just a couple more questions, and then if you have anything, we can go from there. Um, you ever just sit there and you think, I wish my white brothers and sisters, especially within the church, I wish they understood this better about the African American journey. What would you like for your Caucasian fellow church members, fellow children of God, to know better about the African American journey?
Um, That's a big question. Probably the simplest thing is that it's real. That would be the simplest answer. That what when we say we've been discriminated against, or when we say that we have a different experience with the police, when we um, talk about there being inequities, that we're not making it up. That just because you have not experienced it doesn't mean it's true. In this culture, President Trump has introduced, he and Kellyanne Conway, alternative facts, um, where there is it's based on how I feel and my experience. Never mind that there's evidence of something different because I feel this way. This is the way it is. It's my alternative fact. Um, we've got to get away from that. The first thing I would say is that what we're saying is real, that it actually exists, um, that we're not just making it up. Um, I also wish, and I only wish this is understood if the heart is genuine, that African American people aren't stronger than other people, where we can handle the mistreatment or we can handle this. Many of us have so much damage, um, so much generational um, PTSD, post traumatic syndrome, um, that we're not being lazy when we don't work in the same way that our white counterparts work, or that um, we're not being rebellious when we are, um, when we need to express ourselves. Like, um, you know, African Americans have those same range of emotions. We're not less than human. I think subconsciously at times that what has happened to us generationally has happened on the other side generationally, in that um, we we have been viewed less than. Um, and God has to help me with this, but I never will forget what I heard on a Voice of Prophecy program, that I think I've forgiven the speaker who did it, but they brought a story that was um, talked about these communities, and there was a school, and it was equally black and white, and so they put black and white students, and the white students ended up with A's, and the black students ended up with C's, and then the part two was um, we need to love everybody. Some are more gifted athletically, and others more intellectually. And I was like, am I really hearing this from a a Voice of Prophecy program I've looked up to? This was when I was working at a radio station at Oakwood, and we would play these programs, and that, I wish people understood that that's wrong. Like, that's racist. That's wrong. That's misinformed. What he did not put into play is that there is what was the environment there, where, because in some parts of Black culture, to get good grades is to become white, and that's not a good thing. um, in other parts of our culture, getting good grades is great, because now you can um, be a part of changing the system, because more doors are open to you. And so they didn't factor in these generational things. So it's like African American individuals are brilliant people. Some of us come from those who invented mathematics, and to say that people of color aren't as intellectually inclined is, that. So it's. I wish people understood that a lot of their conceptions about African Americans that they've grown up with, or that they see in movies and media and shows, are not the truth, or um, they're a mutated version of the truth. Um, and then some things that are made stereotypical to Black people are things that everybody loves. So it's yeah. So I wish people understood that, one, that the experience we have in discrimination is true. Um, Two, that we experience pain. There was just saw yesterday, but I had seen it a couple of months before, that Black women experience more harm in childbirth because doctors have been conditioned, and even had um, certain studies that wrongly say that Black women can handle pain differently. And so what is given to a white or Indian mother in childbirth to help with that pain or to help with the healing um, is not the first thing given to the African American woman. And so it's things like that, these views and misconceptions that don't seem to matter whether you're evidence or not. There's something that's psychologically ingrained. And so um, those are just a few things that kind of come to mind with um, I wish they understood about the journey here, that people of color often tend to be conspiracy theorists because it's been true. It's happened to us. Um, we've been experimented on. We've been um, quote unquote vaccinated. And those vaccinations sterilize us. Like we've experienced so much damage um, that that old expression, "Pull yourself up by your own bootstrap." Nobody really has. Um, the Black experience has been having a boot on our neck that's helped that person to pull their strap up, but we've had no boots. We've been the foundation. And so I think um, um, as much as, and I'll kind of wrap this part up here. Um, the movie Black Panther, I heard different sermons about it, and people talking about the wrong spiritual elements and things like that. But it was similar. The effect was similar to Roots, the original Roots movie and book by Alex Haley, and it was that experience of seeing Black individuals in positions of power, um, and it meaning something because we've been put down so much or so long, or made to say that you're a side character, you're not a part of the table. And so seeing a movie like that for people of color who may be believers or Christians is inspiring, because it's like we matter. It grossing so much money was like this makes a difference and an impact. And so it's like our some of what we may celebrate may not actually be the best thing sometimes, but it's because things that are true have been twisted to say, um, I've seen movies of Queen of Sheba. She is white, blonde, blue eyed. It's just like just things that are historically inaccurate, promoted so long that we grab onto to even fictional things that are, but that show us in a better light. And so I wish our counterparts understood that we're truly human, and that we are looking to be um, we are looking to be viewed as equals. And this generation now is kind of back where it was in the 60s. We're not asking, we're this is who we are, this is our demand, this is what is owed to us. And so um, I wish people could see our story as a part of their story, of where they are. You know, you watch a movie and you identify with the protagonist. View the African American story, look at it, view it as uncomfortable as it can be, and see that or you viewed as other or ignored sometimes is the what God is using to uplift Himself up, to draw people to the world. So through the suffering, there's redemption. Um, so I hope I said that well. I feel like I got a little wordy, but
You said it very, very well. What have I not asked you that you wish I had asked you?
um, well, there are a couple of things, and maybe a couple of things I would like to ask you though. But perhaps perhaps more theological question, and I think we kind of alluded to it, but um, I think really looking at our worldview and how we view the world, and it plays itself out in things like the images we put in our books, um, or the type of stories we tell, or things like that. But our theology, um, our worldview impacts our day-to-day lives and our interactions with our brothers and sisters. And so I really think that um, really looking at things, you know, stepping back and say, how am I preaching? Am I preaching simply what's comfortable, or am I preaching something that's biblical that everyone is uncomfortable with, not just to be uncomfortable, but because it's the truth that God is bringing? Am I bringing it in love? Am I truly listening? Am I being quick to hear and slow to speak? So I really think that transforming the way we look at theology, asking ourselves, is this just tradition that I'm looking at, or is it, or is this something biblical? So, two questions I would probably might have more, but these are the ones that come to mind. Is how would you, um, as a white individual, be it you, Brother Gary, or be it whoever is white and watching this, do you know how to use your influence um, as a white individual? Do you know how to use your whiteness for the good? Do you know how to use that influence to impact change? Um, and then the second question is probably more one for you, Brother Thurber, is with these conversations and I guess other interactions that you feel like you have a grounding or a sense of mission and purpose, to use your position in the circle that you move into, truly help to bring about transformation in our church to where we are healthier, not only when it comes to race, but just healthier when it comes to even classes and genders. So you feel like this is giving you some of the foundation you need.
Those are really good questions. Yeah, I believe there's no question these interviews have helped me a great deal. Your answers today, I'll listen to this again, and our team is going to write it up too. It's going to be part of our paper this next year. Our interview today will be in written form. It absolutely has. I'm always shocked, Victor, on how I've just missed it so many times, and not even knowing I was missing it. It wasn't a heart issue in terms of not wanting to. At least I don't think it was. It just maybe just pure ignorance and insensitivity, not trying to put myself in others' shoes. So my first little bit of awakening, if you will, came when I moved to the Lake Union. You remember back in 2013 and 14, the Lake region was celebrating 70 years. You remember that? That's when I arrived. And I got there just after the celebration. You had four of them. You had one in Chicago where you remembered your 70 years. There was one in Indianapolis. There was one in Benton Harbor. And there was one in Detroit. And I missed the one in Chicago. But I went to the one in Benton Harbor. I went to the one in Indianapolis. And I went to the one in Detroit. And I'll never forget it. I was shocked. Victor, I went all the way through our schools, and all the way through the seminary. No one taught me the history of the African American journey. Now, it was there that I could have learned it, right? But it was never brought out what really happened and why we have regional conferences, and what took place that made them need to be created. I'll never forget talking to one of the gentlemen at Benton Harbor, and he happened to be the son of, he was a pastor, the son of one of the first directors, departmental directors. And he remembered as a boy going to departmental meetings for the union that they would set up at hotels. And of course, the families were all invited to come, and then they would show up, and it would be in a hotel that would not allow blacks to stay over. And his family had to sleep in the car. And I said, "You're kidding. That really? Oh yeah, more than once." And then I believe it was at Benton Harbor. The lady, she was in her 90s, but she was as spry as she could be. She was, as a very young lady, like 20, 22, the secretary of the first president of the Lake Region Conference. So she was right there when it was created, and the stories that I heard had a huge impact on me. One of the things that I've done recently is I've written the North American Division. And I've said, I think we got to do two things right now. One is we need to have a recall of all of our Adventist history books and make sure that the journey of the African American is accurately portrayed. Because I think it's actually one of the most beautiful stories we have. The success of our regional conferences is one of the things we ought to be the most proud of. In my opinion, the African American community had every right, every biblical right, to walk away from this church and start their own denomination, if you will. But they didn't do that. Instead, they carved out a very difficult path just to stay with the church. And now we have, when I was in the Atlantic Union, I was president of Northern New England Conference. And, Northeastern Conference is bigger than the rest of the conferences put together. Well, that's one of our regional conferences. The success and growth of those conferences are one of the great stories that we ought to tell. So I think, number one, our kids at a very young age need to learn the true story, because not only is there tragedy in it, there's reason to praise the Lord of what happened despite the challenges. The second thing I asked for them to do is, just like they have, I don't know if you've been in AD, the new building or not, but they have a whole wall that they've transformed into telling the story of the Adventist medical work, starting with the Western, what's it called? Western Institute of Health, or Health Institute, there in Battle Creek, and then now to all the hospital systems we have. I challenge them to have in the NAD building a place where the African American history is told in our church, because I think it needs to be told. It needs to be shared. You said something earlier, and I'll just come in and chime in with it and agree with you. I asked you a question, what do you think of when people say, well, I'm colorblind? I kind of think that's a little bit related to the question, do we need regional conferences? And a lot of people say, well, we ought to just all join together. And frankly, I would be one that would say, well, if we do that, let's all join the regional conference. I want you to know that's where I'm at. But the truth is, as I see it today, we need the regional conferences. We need them greatly. We should be appreciating them greatly. You do work, and you're specialized at doing work that the state conferences are not really familiar with. And it's tremendous what's going on in some of the ministries and some of the churches that I've been at in our regional conferences. And I'm grateful for them. And I want to be a spokesperson from somebody who grew up in a state conference saying, praise the Lord for regional conferences. And let's work together. It's not a racist thing. Anybody can join any conference or anybody they want to. And we have Caucasians that are members of the Lake region, and we have African Americans who are members of state conferences. That's not the issue, but the work that's being done is a wonderful thing. I want to, Victor, to answer your question, I want to be a good agent for help and change. I feel inadequate, and I feel like I've got still so much to learn. My wife and I are reading a book together every night. We're both trying to learn, and we're getting better, and we're understanding more. But the truth is, there's a lot that's been broken. There's a lot of trust that's been lost. And the only way to build that back up is for us in our actions and in our walk to show we want to be different. I'm very, very interested in our union office looking like our constituency. I want to have leadership here in our office. I want Central States to be able to say, yeah, we're part of this. And to know that they have a voice and that they're every bit as important as any other conference in our union. That's a big deal to me. I want our college to be a place that any student can come and feel very safe and happy they came. there are challenges along the way. So structurally, you mentioned we've got a lot of work to do, and it is hard. It's hard when we're constituency based. A constituency has to vote itself out of existence. You can't just say, well, this conference will dissolve here, or this will. So change is hard when we're institutionalized, like you had mentioned earlier. That doesn't mean, though, that we don't constantly wrestle with it. And I'll say this, for whatever it's worth. I spent most of my years pastoring. And so it's been a while, so I don't know if I could pastor today. I think a pastoring job today is much more difficult than when I was pastoring. But I do remember what it was like to pastor, and I can remember the struggle it was to put together 2 nickels for ministry sometimes. I think as a church, the one thing we can do now, even within our current structure, is to constantly remind ourselves what's the proper thing to be happening and at which level. In other words, the conference ought not to be doing anything that's really a local church issue. And if that were to happen, probably more things would stay in the local church. And the union shouldn't do anything that's a conference issue. That ought to be with the conferences. And the NAD, you go right on up. And if you follow that logically, what you would have is a very small general conference and a small North American division. And then it would get larger as you go down, and then the biggest piece of the pie will be what's at the local church. I think when you go back to 1903 and read what the discussion was among the Adventist leadership, and Ellen White was there, and what each level of the church ought to be doing, we got it upside down. And if we would just go back and read and follow what was given there and what Ellen White endorsed, we would find that the emphasis would get back on the local church where it should be. So in that regard, I want to be an element of change as well. So I don't know if those things help or not, if any of that made any sense, but I'm being impacted greatly by these interviews. I'm learning. And then I'm relying also on people like you, who's sitting right over here, and our Gil Webb, our secretary, Roger Wade, others in our office here. Help me with my blind spots, and because I want to do well. I want to be an agent of change, and that is in my heart to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think a couple of things that are crucial is that God, David talks about being shaped and formed in the mother's womb, and I think it's important for everybody to know that God put us in the skin that we're in, the experience that we have, for a reason, and that each one is valuable to Him, and that it's not a mistake that we find ourselves in the places and positions we're in. And I quote from Ellen White: "God calls who He enables," and so and then He enables the call. I think that's the proper way. He enables those He calls, and so I think there's hope. There's hope for everyone to go from where they are right now to where they need to be. And so I think that's important for everybody to remember. From those of us who think we're the least to those of us who are in positions of authority, I think they're all crucial. I think they're all uh, invaluable. So I do think that's important for people to know and hear. Um,
Some of the things you said too, like today especially, I want to be especially vigilant about two things now. See, we actually have a really good communication department that helps with this already. But putting the narrative out there of the biblical narrative of who Jesus is, not only what he did and how he grew up, but just who he was, and the stories that we tell. I really cringed when you told me the story from the Voice of Prophecy. That hurt. And I imagine it hurt you more than it even hurt me, but that hurt to hear that. But I think back even to growing up and the stories I heard from the missionaries and that came back from Africa. And it gives you the feeling, you see, that who was the Savior? Well, Jesus was the Savior, but sometimes you get the feeling, well, maybe the white culture that went over there saved them. And what a horrible way to present any of that, and the distorted feelings that can be put in kids' minds from something like that. It's got to be careful on the stories you tell and how you tell them.
yeah, it reminded me of another incident, and I think my wife talked to the individual afterwards or later, but it was a children's story, and they were using colors, and of course, black represented sin, and it was my wife cringed at that. It was like that can do a lot to the psyche, and the Bible talks about our sins being red like crimson. So like there's a different thing that can be used, but just simple things like that do impact. And this Voice of Prophecy thing was, say, about 20 years ago or more that that happened. At least 20 years ago. So that stuff stays with you. So it's so important that we ask God to give us wisdom in relating.
You mentioned you have some Native American in your blood too, but your mom coming from Oklahoma. So let me tell you about one of the times that I was so deaf, I can't believe I was. So I'm an old guy now, okay? So when I was first starting in ministry, actually the first year of ministry that I was in, we had a guy, he retired from the General Conference. He was the vice president of the General Conference. I won't say his name. And he moved to our church. And he was a great storyteller. He loved telling story to kids. So we invited him to come and tell a big story every day to our vacation Bible school. Kids loved him. He was a funny storyteller, very engaging. But he told a story that was very humorous. And it was a story that happened on the plains and back when, the settlers were moving in and then they had Indian trouble. And anyway, at the end of the day, it had a really funny punchline, but it was at the expense of the Indian culture. And when he told it, the whole place just burst laughing. And this was like 1983, okay? Wow, what a great story. And I picked it up and I used it a number of times when I went to different places. I got the same result. Just a hilarious laughter, and people just think it was the funniest story. And then I told it in a church in Michigan, up near Mount Pleasant. And I don't know if you know the territory, but there's an Indian reservation right there. And I told a story and nobody laughed. And I didn't realize that that church had really reached out to the Native Americans, and they had several families that were attending. And one of the Native Americans came up to me afterwards in the most gracious way and said, I know you don't realize it, but that hurt today. And I'll never forget the feeling that I had. I don't think I ever felt so stupid in my life. Why didn't I see that already? Why did he have to tell me that? Why didn't I see that in 1983? And so the stories we tell and how we tell them, that's one of the things I want to really pay attention to, because they have a huge impact. And we don't even realize sometimes the bias or what we're implying when we tell the story. So I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to pick up on that, and I'm going to really try hard to be diligent on that. So I thank you for that. You were very thoughtful today, Victor.
Appreciate that.
You were extremely thoughtful, and you're the kind of person I'd love just to talk with you for several days sometimes. I like just to pick your brain about some stuff. So thank you for being with us today. Pastor Victor Wilson, you've been amazing today. Thank you for taking time. I just want you to know we're glad to have you here in Mid-America, pastoring in our territory, even though you're part of the Lake region. We're glad to have you, and thank you for your service to the Lord. And I hope our paths cross many times in the days to come.
I appreciate you all having me.
And we'll hopefully be in touch again soon. God bless, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you.